Welcome back to Blake's Craft Beer Podcast. I'm back in Heavier Than Air in Centerville, Ohio with this awesome guy. Please introduce yourself. And you've heard him a couple times now.
Yeah, getting frequent flyer miles, for lack of a better pun there. My name is Nick Tarkany, owner and brewer of Heavier Than Air Brewing Company. Yeah, and happy to be back. It's always fun to be on.
No, you're. I never count miles with you. Just you can be a freeloader for all you want. I'm kidding.
But hey, there's no freeloading. I mean, you get free beer out of this.
I know. No, that's a joke, but.
Yeah.
Or what is it called when you're like going stowaway? You're not a stowaway.
Oh yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, for sure. No, like I said, we're always happy to have you, and it's been fun to see you get the response and the growth that you've had, and. It's been cool.
Yeah. So what's been going on with you lately?
So we're coming out of the winter. It wasn't quite as strong as last year, which frankly was a bit of an anomaly and a surprise, especially January. January was weirdly like one of our top 5 months ever.
Wow.
And January is usually a not great. Everybody's in kind of the post credit card debt coma. Everybody's recovering from that. The weather wasn't great, so we had a lot of factors. January wasn't bad, all things considered, but it definitely wasn't like last year was. February started to turn around. Everything was a bit better. Traffic was all right. We dabbled in some other things, sampling some food stuff for folks to test out for potential things to help augment the experience here. I won't go into a ton of detail, but yeah, we were sampling like pizza stuff and pretzels and other things like that. So, which is it's for to help enhance the beer experience, and we're definitely looking into ways to enhance that for everybody when they come in. March has been great so far. Obviously, we're going into the strongest part of the month here with St. Patrick's Day and March Madness, and we've got the Irish Stout coming on Nitro and Irish Red beer, and the menu's going to be in a really good spot for the next couple weeks.
That's exciting. So, as a business owner, how do you navigate January? Like, how do you forecast it? Because it sounded like you said it was better than what you guys expected. But
yeah, like last year was definitely better than we expected. This time around, it was okay. January usually kind of industry agnostic, anything consumer facing, whether it's retail or food and beverage. The last 2 weeks of January and the first week of February are usually terrible. Just it's end of season sales. It's again that post holiday credit card debt payoff time for a lot of folks with discretionary income that are still kind of feeling their way around it. And there's another period of time which is in the August going into September timeframe, the back to school timeframe. And even like as early as like mid-July, that it's pretty quiet on a lot of fronts unless you happen to have a patio and you're just doing a lot of easy light stuff in the summertime. Easy people going on vacation, people gearing up for the fall, seasonal changeover. So those are the two periods where you're going to see like end of season sales for retail across the board, or big promotional periods. And the only one that really makes money for people is Black Friday holiday shopping timeframe prior to the holidays. So there's some interesting industry trends that are, kind of dictate macro factors, but we're also, in an experience in a consumer experience side of things that is much more seasonal, family gatherings, holiday timeframe. And then if you happen to have holiday parties and things like that, you're coming out of the backside of that. There's a lot of fatigue there for people. So how we plan for that, promote events, have new products, like promote those products, kind of embrace the weather, kind of not being the best. So like you're not doing yard work, you're not doing spring cleaning yet. So how you pull people in is largely contingent on what you can make of it, and then try and get people to enjoy their time. I like Jen and Ian over at Bach. They've got the Cold and Crafted event that's mid to end January, and that gets a really good response. And there's a lot of people that are up for that kind of fireside chat kind of environment, beer event inside, warm by the fireplace kind of vibe. So you can run out of that really quick, but to have them be able to do something like that is a really good experience, because they're also partnering with a bunch of us to have beer on tap to accommodate that kind of crowd to come buy a beer ticket, hang out with friends, have some social time, and then sample a bunch of beer. So there's different ways to do it. Events have a lot to do with it, and then embracing the seasonality component. And there's, like we kind of talked about on the holiday panel with the other guys, you have X number of followers. If you got, a couple more followers of the people that do know what you are to come out every week, that helps business. It goes a long way from a consistency perspective. So everything's about incremental lift, right? Like getting your marginal extra people to come through the door.
Yeah, because the one brewery that really caught my eye this winter was Southern Ohio, because they had 2 major events, and both in January and February, and that's something that was exciting to see, because sometimes in January, you don't see many big events like that, and it was nice to have a place. And
I mean, if you think about it, even the Winter Warmer event up in Cleveland that OCBA puts on, it's in March, so it's late for the season for Winter Warmer, so to speak, but it's kind of they can hedge bets on weather not being too bad, and it's folks really being able to rally around going to an event and enjoying their time. I think there is event fatigue, especially when it's like smaller events that you just kind of have on auto repeat. But when you have the bigger ones, it still gets a crowd out. Do you have a bent with what you're doing? Do you have some sort of nonprofit charity component? Do you have a socialization component? Do you have a recreation component? Like, something like Hops in the Hangar in August, there's an air show. It's one of the best beer events I've been to. And really what are you doing to make your thing special? And you can't just do that every week. So you can be thoughtful about how you do things, and not everything has to be or can be driven by some sort of discount, because you tend to race yourself to the bottom on that front.
Is there like a certain beer style, like in January, that you need to maybe will help draw people out?
Malty, and the darker beers, your stouts, your porters, your amber pales, your darker winter styles absolutely have to be on the menu. But you also have to have lighter versions of those as a thing too, because not everybody's trying to hit it so hard. I mean, you think about dry January, that was the thing that was so surprising about last year. We were like, what dry January? Like, traffic was massive anyways, and we had a couple of big crowds that came in that helped with that, but traffic overall was pretty strong. So how your assortment and offerings about what you have on tap does matter. Like, you're not doing, summer pails or other things like that. You might have 1 or 2 lighter, cleaner options on the menu just for people that really aren't feeling the heavier stuff or the darker stuff. But those are, it's cold, you want to feel warm. There's maltier styles tend to lend themselves better to that seasonal, especially the cuisine side of things as well, holiday meals, that kind of stuff. So that does help.
So I guess I had a long day. Let's get a beer in already. So we'll start with the one that's not on the flight board.
Yep. So we got JP7 coming back. It's our kind of West Coast IPA, standard flagship style beer. I believe we had it on last time we were here. It's super easy, super reliable, good malt character, kind of bready, a little biscuity, has a little bit of a tartness to it, and then the hops, it's traditional West Coast IPA hops, and then a really nice dry hop bill.
So I talk about this a lot with people that have West Coast. Where is the sticking point when you make a West Coast? Because, there's others that are like piney pine. Right. And then there's others that say they're a West Coast IPA, but it's hard to tell if it actually is a West Coast.
So I think ours flirts the line, frankly, between a Midwest IPA and a West Coast. Because if you think about traditional Midwest IPAs like Bell's Two Hearted or I know it's considered a pale ale, but like Great Lakes Burning River, like it's got a really bitter hoppy character to it. I think it's excellent. Every time I've ever had it, I was like, this feels like an IPA to me. And I know they have their Midwest IPA brand property, but pine is kind of the deciding line there, because you have the citrus component that's supposed to be an accent note. Our pine character probably tends to be a bit more earthy. It's a little less resiny than a true Pliny the Elder or something like that. So it's a gigantic IPA from Oregon. One of those. There are still great West Coast IPAs that are tried and true West Coast pine bombs. the palate here is maybe a little less, I don't want to say accepting, but maybe informed about how balanced and nice those can be without it just being a giant, like chewing on a wreath IPA. So ours floats the line there. It's softer for sure, and the wet hop version in the summer is definitely softer, but it's still really nice. I mean, it's rooted in inspiration from a West Coast IPA, just a little more moderated for the Midwest.
So when people come to your brewery, is there a certain IPA, are they looking for a hazy when they come to you, or are they known you for so long that you know what you're having here?
I think we've come a long way with the JP7 in terms of the beer, the recipe evolution and execution and consistency, to the point where you have a lot of people who are looking for that when they come in. Our hazy IPA, our flagship Falcon project, is still kind of, when it's on tap, it drives traffic. Like, people see it's on tap and they come in for it, which is great. It's our number one seller when it's on tap usually. But it's good we're getting a little more variety and breadth. The Pale Ale, the XPA, has done really well. And that, in style origin, is rooted in like being a West Coast IPA light. It's a big style that's popular in Australia because it still has a bit of hoppy character, but it's easy, it's simple, it's nice. It's something that I think having balance on the menu matters, right? You're really highly hopped beers, you're really highly hopped beers that happen to also be really bitter or have a specific component that leads into what you think a traditional style would be, either West Coast or hazy or Midwest or, whatever those might be. So I think if you have a variety, you can help people navigate where they might be on that day. And then if they know what they want already, they're ordering it and, they're happy.
So is Brett similar to a brewed IPA, or are those two different?
Sorry, repeat that?
Brewed.
Oh, like the dryer, like using the champagne yeast?
Yeah.
To be honest, it's like, we've never dabbled with that, but I know when the handful that I had, when it kind of had its craze, we'll call it like mid to late 2010s, the ones that I had tended to be really good. They had a tartness. They did have that kind of like Chardonnay champagne vibe to it. I think you can, I don't know, those tend to be very specific for certain people looking for that thing. I think accessibility with IPAs, I think people are looking for having like 2 or 3 options, including like a lighter option of a pale ale that kind of hints at the bigger full IPA grain and hop bill, is something that I think you're able to triangulate where people tend to want to be. And then if you have the maltier stuff like the English Pales and Ambers and maybe like a Vienna Lager or things like that, you get to cover the bases there. That it's not a hoppy beer at all, but you've got some earthy character with those. Because,
an IPA, there's some other trends coming back that I never thought you would see come back, but I mean, we'll get to it later down the road, but you have an idea, you have a black IPA,
right.
And that's something you're starting to see pop up again. Which is exciting to see it actually come back.
It is. And the funny thing is with that, you hear people say, oh, you don't really see that as much around here. But the more I'm paying attention to it, there's a good number in the area that there are semi-regular offerings. I know, like with the Alematic and Loose Ends collab, where they do that black IPA style as well. Like, they've got it more often than they don't. So there's definitely... there's an affinity for that. There's affinity for, like, I think the thing right now that's interesting is an affinity for like black lagers, black IPAs, dark beers that don't seem like they're dark beers. So they have a different character, whether it's a tiny little bit of toast or if it's like full on roast. I mean, that's the easiest way for me to help describe somebody. Like, so we had a Scottish export ale that was on, and I characterized it as like malty, and it had a bit of toast. So like slightly like toasted grains, not full like coffee roast. And that's an easier way to kind of help get people to understand what dark malts are aimed to do. So like you talked about a black IPA, there's 2 ways to approach it. Ours is technically a Cascadia dark.
I guess it's
the second to last, yeah.
So it's like, I guess since we're already in it, let's talk about it now.
Yeah, so since we're there. So it has like full on like roasted malts in it. And as a thing, like black IPAs, you'll see 2 things. You'll see somebody put something in like Black Patent, which has more of a toasted character that's not true roast. And it just helps give it some color. And you still get majority of an IPA malt bill and or hop bill. So like Land Grant's Eclipse beer last year was a black IPA. It was one of the best black IPAs that I had ever had. It tended to lean more towards traditional IPA flavor with a little bit of that dark malt character, and it was well balanced. It was really nice. But then you've got the other ones like ours that actually really leans into the roast part. Mm-hmm. It's candy roast. You've got a bit of corn sugar in there to give it some sweetness that doesn't ferment out. And then you've got that hop character with like the Simcoe and the Amarillo on the back that really kind of, there's a little bit of spice in the back of your throat with that. So it does get that West Coast IPA character from the hops, but you've got definitely a grain bill that feels a bit stronger, and it's not so hop forward, so to speak.
Because when people come in that I was too young to remember the first black IPAs coming out. Mm-hmm. When people ordering it now, are they expecting what they had a long time ago, or is there like a newness to black IPAs that people weren't aware of?
I still think there's some novelty to it, especially in this area, because you're getting more, like people are trying them more, and you're getting folks to try it out. But we still have a large amount of the audience that's not super initiated to it. They may or may not have a ton of experience with the first kind of era of black IPAs. So I don't know if we have a ton of expectations. We just try and help give information to kind of let them know where we're at with ours. Mm-hmm. And then it's kind of up to them to decide whether or not they like it or not.
Because are these better than they were originally when they first came out, or is it about the same?
I would call it an evolved approach. I think you refine things. You're looking for balance. I think that's the biggest thing with beers right now is you're looking for balance with a lot of things. You still have some, pine cone bombs with some of the IPAs and stuff like that, but I think that era of over-the-top characteristic, you're looking for balance. You're looking for enjoyment. You're looking for consistency, some repeatability in terms of like, can I have more than one of these? And certain beers aren't designed to be, they're supposed to be experienced beers. But I know as a brewery that tries to have 60 to 75% of what we carry be something you can have more than one of, and then you've got some more special, thoughtful things that are more adventurous, we'll say. Mm-hmm. So the hope is that we've always, even if you've got one of those, you can always index to something on the menu that's, I'm not going to say they're calmer, but it's something that feels a little more expected and reliable. And that's something that I think there's a lot of people looking for reliability right now. They'll do the specialty thing, but they're not going to spend a night drinking 7 of them, usually, unless it's just that good, which could be the case. You kind of hope it is, but right. Some of those get up there in the ABVs too.
Right. How high can black IPAs go?
Before you start characterizing it as like an imperial or a double black IPA, which could be pretty cool to try and test out one of these days, usually I would say like 8% is kind of the threshold. Some people characterize a double as like a 7.5 in alcohol, and also how much are you adding that much more adjunct sugar or carbohydrate to ferment to give it a higher ABV. Because if you're getting above 8%, you're looking at imperial double territory in terms of classification. Mm-hmm. We could probably make a triple if we wanted to. You got to really load it up.
You should try that sometime.
Triple black IPA.
Hey, that would be a perfect Black Friday if you would actually, do.
That's a really good idea.
Because that's something you haven't seen yet.
You've never seen that. I think you got to pick and choose what parts of that you want to be on steroids. Because everything tends to go up in sweetness. Uh-huh. Everything's going to go up in alcohol. Everything's going to go up in hops. And, I kind of try and help people understand this with IBUs. When somebody says, what are the IBUs on this? It's like, not all IBUs are created equal. Mm-hmm. You've got true bitterness IBUs that tend to create a stronger profile in pale ales and IPAs. But then you've got other hops that are not traditionally hoppy to what would be considered a layman. There's a lot of things that come out, and IBUs still get extracted from even the grain as a part of your beer. So I feel like the sky's the limit there. It just depends on, do you feel like you have an audience for it? Do you feel like you have a way to execute that? And is your approach something you can... A triple black IPA is probably going to feel intimidating to certain parts of the crowd that would come in. But can you help people feel adventurous about trying something like that if they are interested in it? So it could be interesting. I mean, black IPA for Black Friday or triple black IPA for Black Friday could be fun.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be able to make very much of it because, you know, the yield on something like that, it only ends up being like 35, 40 gallons. But I don't think you're going to have a ton of people buying it right off the bat anyways, unless it feels that incredible.
So where do you think people nowadays understand what an IBU is?
I think they have a blanket understanding, and then it's synonymous with bitterness.
What do you think the most misunderstood thing on IBU?
Again, they think it's just bitterness, like straight across bitterness. Because, believe it or not, our all-season 5.5% stout is one of the. It's a beer that has some of the most. By calculation, has second most IBUs of any beer we've ever made. It's like 80 IBUs or something like that, but you would never know it because you're using traditional English noble hops for more of an earthy character that gives it more of an earthy bitterness rather than like a piney or sharp, like metallic bitterness that some other beers might have. But also it's masked by the roast. Like it's chocolate and coffee and all these other layers. So it's our job to help people understand, and we don't have to over-explain it because customers may not care 100%, but if they are somebody who asks about it and that are hung up on that number, and like for us on our menu, we don't put the IBU number on. We just help people understand it's going to have a moderate amount of bitterness. It's going to be citrus and pine. It's going to be like flavors. I want to attach flavors to that, not necessarily, you know, bitterness for the sake of bitterness. Like this is going to taste like Brussels sprouts, right? Like that's, you don't want people to kind of have that thing in their mind ahead of time. You want to help them understand what the bitterness can be like in a positive way, not necessarily that it's just straight bitterness.
Yeah. So going back to when you were talking about having balance, where do you think people in craft beer are with that currently now? Are places getting better with balance, or are there?
I mean, I to be honest, it's a prudent business decision. I think there's more places that are more open to having a significant chunk of their menu and offering be something that's a little more thoughtful and considered from a balance perspective. Look, beers that are out of balance, I think it depends on what you're looking for in terms of, okay, you woke up one day and you said, I want to make this style of beer and here's what I want it to be like. The specific outcomes for a specific beer are important to still have, but you also need to make beer that is, again, enjoyable, repeatable, consumable, and you allow for the special things to be special. I think people are being more thoughtful about what they're offering an assortment is, merchandising wise, like what the makeup of their tap list is. So I do think you're getting to the point where, I mean, we said we would never make lagers. Well, guess what we're testing for a recipe right now?
Lager.
We're going to make a lager.
Which I think you're going to kill. I mean, you already have like a golden ale and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's close enough to where
Right.
I think you're going to be fine.
Well, and that's we think there's an opportunity, both from we make our English ordinary pale bitter, which is like a slice of bread in beer form. It's like a classic English pub ale, right? It's straw colored, it's super easy. We take it to events, it's 4% alcohol. And I think the idea is we want to have other things we can take to the events that are maybe lighter and have a different profile to it that isn't maybe necessarily so English referenced. Because, you know, between the ordinary and between our true ESB, like we've got a good, I don't want to call it a spine, but we have a good foundation on our menu that involves those English styles. And we do other stuff, obviously, but everything is they're ales. This will be the first time that we're able to try and do a true lager. We're messing around with a yeast that's a slightly warmer fermenting lager yeast, and we're on like version 2 of that test right now. Unfortunately, it's not here at the brewery.
That's okay.
It's on a pilot system that's not on site, but we're trying to figure that out. And I think it's an offering that, because you have folks that are like tuned in, especially folks that are used to coming from Michelob, Bud, Coors, Miller, Yuengling territory, that the ESB profile, even though it's kind of tangential in kind of your malt, the sweetness or lack thereof, and the dryness in the finish, they're not the same as what a lager would be, because a lager is supposed to be finishing a lot cleaner on profile, and you're just tasting the ingredients, so to speak. Whereas an English style beer, you're getting a lot of other things going on, butteriness, a bit of a toastedness, a bit of a dry characteristic. There's different things going on there.
Because are you guys pretty much maxed out to, or could you put lager tanks in here, or is that?
I mean, what we're looking at, I mean, anybody who's been in here knows that we still have plastic fermenters. So for the fact that we're able to turn out beer that we do with that equipment, in a perfect world, you've got glycol jacketed fermenters that you would be able to do all kinds of beer on, not just not just ales, but also lagers, because that's the differentiation in the fermentation strains, short of like talking about Brettanomyces. So which are for sours, for those who aren't sure what that was, but you have a very educated audience. I would expect them to know what that is.
I think so.
I would hope so. But as a thing, I think there's still some other like ale recipes, ale territory beers that we can explore, like offering wise, but we have not been really able to do much in the way of the German styles. And we like referencing international beers and have our own take on it, either with local ingredients or otherwise. But I think there's a lot of room with the lager stuff to explore. And if we do something we already think is in the ballpark from a lager perspective, and it gives us more character and something more interesting, I think there's a seasonality thing attached to the lagers, especially around Oktoberfest timeframe, that is important to try and explore for us.
Because I just heard you were going to make a Pilsner sometime.
Not necessarily.
You said German. So
I did.
That's where my head
I'll tell you
first
what,
goes.
I'll make a deal with you. If we can make a Pilsner that's anywhere as good as like Third Eye's Pilsner, then we'll make a Pilsner. But until then, we'll just
It's that hard?
We'll just keep buying theirs. I mean, you talk about balance again. We go back to that. Some of them have that kind of metallic character. Some of them aren't great. Some of them aren't soft. Some of them are kind of harsh. Even for having lager yeast as a part of their characteristic, which is supposed to ferment clean, that's gonna require quite a bit of R&D for us to figure out. I think we can figure out something between an American and a Vienna lager, something kind of bohemian in style there that would be all right. That I think we're iterating on already, and we're getting some good results initially. But I think Pilsner is a whole other thing, and I think you're also relying on.
Or is it more like a Kolsch style?
Which is really easy. They're really crushable, and technically Kolsch's they use ale yeast, but they're temperature controlled for about 2 weeks at about 60 degrees. You have a cold soft crash, we'll call it, and we've definitely talked. We have a recipe for that. We just haven't done it yet. Again, I think there's some practice that needs to go into that before we decide to do that. And we're also like, is it something that overlaps with stuff we already have on the menu, kind of in profile? Maybe if we let one of those lag and we do something over the summer and offer that instead, I think that makes sense, because assortment's really big for us. Like we don't tend to like to have a lot of stuff that feels like it's in the same ballpark. Like you want some tangential, like loosely referencing, but tangential styles.
Because one of my favorite, I've been there, but a couple of weeks ago, I went down with they're called Truth Beer Consequences. They do a podcast on different thing, and the night I went down to help them they do something called a Kolsch night. So we quit halfway, then we go down to Northern Row, and they do a Kolsch night, and that was so much fun. It was probably not that, maybe a little bit taller, and then they just come around with Kolsch's, and it was just fun. It was different, and they make excellent Kolsch down there.
They do. How's that locate? Like that location's amazing too.
It is.
That open warehouse style. That place is incredible location wise. It's kind of off the beaten path and over the Rhine, but if you can get
right
there,
next to Rhine, guys.
It's amazing. The location is great.
Because I think it's actually still part of like the old Moorline area.
I think so. Yeah, it is actually.
So eventually, they're a future, hopefully.
Yeah.
But
they do really simple things really well. Because they usually have like 8 styles on, 10 styles on max, and it tends to be more traditional. But that's also some of that Cincinnati German beer heritage that's showing through there with some of that stuff.
Does Dayton have a lot of German heritage, or is it a mix? Because this past weekend was Bachfest, and
Right.
it's amazing how many people actually like a Bach.
Right.
Because Bach had to grow on me a couple years
Right.
before I truly started enjoying it.
When they're done well, they're good. I think it's like the Pilsner. Like you have a lot that I think it takes a bit of romance with the recipe to figure out how to do that. A little bit of love and care. If you just like come up with a recipe and try and trot it out there, I think you need to make sure you're refined before you go to market with something. Because I've had some, and my girlfriend who's a big Bach fan, and she lives actually down in Covington. There's a lot of Bachs that are put out there that it feels like it's just kind of like going through the motions, putting out a beer, and then there's others that really know what they're doing. I'll use Third Eye again. The one that they had is incredible.
They put one in a barrel too.
Yeah,
I have that in the fridge.
I have not had that, but I can only imagine what that's like.
Maybe I'll save that for our
Holiday.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good one. If we have it ready to go, so one of the beers that you have on the flight board here is our Winter Warmer, which is effectively like an 8% version of a Snickerdoodle cookie in beer form. So vanilla, molasses, cinnamon, nutmeg on the finish, a bit of a woody finish there. We did put some of that in barrels, and we're hoping to release it around Black Friday timeframe,
nice.
if it turns out. So fingers crossed. We've had good luck so far on that stuff, and it's a long waiting game to find out if your stuff turns out. So that'll be in the barrels for like 5 months before we even take a look at it.
I can't wait to try it. So what is a winter warmer? I mean, I've heard the term, but I've never got a good clarification. What is a winter warmer?
So think English, like dark strong ale type territory, with molasses as an adjunct, or some sort of like dark sugar like that as an adjunct. And then you put spices in it. You can put allspice, you can put ginger, you can put a bunch of different things. We tend to go more traditional with the cinnamon and nutmeg, but we're also using a Snickerdoodle cookie in the like we know what kind of a traditional winter warmer tends to be, but we wanted to use a Snickerdoodle as a reference for kind of the flavor profile that you're creating out of that beer. So we think it does a pretty good job. The maltiness on the front is really nice. You get a bit of the cinnamon on the front, and eventually that's going to fade a little bit. Cinnamon tends to have a weird the character of that spice tends to fade over time. Vanilla tends to as well as a part of that. So the beer will just get a little earthier over time as it ages, but we're already almost out of it. We released it beginning of February, and it's almost gone. We didn't have a ton of it since I carved out some to put into barrels, but it's definitely gone over really well. And I think we'll be out of it in the right time. We'll be out of it within the next 2 to 3 weeks, top max. So as that goes, we'll be springtime, and we won't have the winter warmer on tap anymore. So
because I've had some winter warmers I've liked, and there's been others I did not know what was going on with it. But so it's been a hit and miss with me on winter warmers. But now I like yours.
Well, and so there are some that are, ours is definitely a dessert beer, like in terms of approach. There are some that are not. Some that are like just like dark ale, like English dark ale, where they've added spices to it, and the ABV's been cranked up a little bit, and it's a little more traditional. So I think we've taken an approach on this. We've made it. We have a take on it, and there's a lot of good ones out there, anyways. So I remember Sam Adams had one that was quite good for a while, but then you think about what you're trying to drink consistently, and we felt like it was a profile that you're going to have one, maybe two of them, and we want it to feel like a dessert beer. So that's kind of the description we wanted to have attached to it.
Because I didn't get the chance to try it this year, but they normally do like a cinnamon toast Bach too. That's last year was pretty good. And it was, and I know it might not be traditional with a Bach, but it was nice to have a little change in Bach.
You got to wonder sometimes about traditional profiles and how specific some of these things are, like cinnamon toast, crunch Bach. How it's obviously going to be a dessert style. You probably need to have a day around it so you can sell through a bunch of it and get people really exposed and excited for it, which I think you probably would get people out for it. you got to wonder, like it to me, it's almost like the pumpkin beers have gotten, where if you're not out of it by a certain time, you might be stuck with it for a bit.
I've seen breweries have it for months.
I know, which is why we kind of got away from doing pumpkin beers. I know some people really are disappointed we made that decision, but when you release it in September and you still have it on in December and January, and when you've got other beers you need to get on tap seasonally, if you don't have it gone by Thanksgiving, you're going to sit on it for a while.
Because one of the pumpkins I like is from New Ales.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, Becky?
Yeah.
Wes is always funny with that. It could be Nikki coming up with the names. I don't know, but they're hilarious with their names.
Yeah. Which hopefully I get to do them again soon because I enjoy them as well.
They're great people. We love those guys.
So I'm going to get into this next. So the reason why, one of the reasons why I came down here, not that, but you had a post about last week about barley and stuff like that. So let's talk about
So
what exactly is going on and why some places are more
for the breweries that we source some of our grains from Canada through, we use Country Malt and some other providers, but we have found, for us, especially since we do a lot of English beers, some of the American grown barley, it does okay for some of those profiles, but we know traditional English two-row is called Maris Otter, it's a two-row strain. It's pretty high in protein. American two-row is not quite. It's more carbohydrate forward in its makeup. We have noticed that the Canadian, like the pale ale malts and some of those, tend to have the higher. They're Maris Otter strains that have been brought and grown in Canada, and in the central part of Canada, it's just nothing but fields of barley and wheat and oats and other things. So for us, Maris Otter, which we used initially from England, and the prices went up probably 5-6 years ago, and then COVID definitely caused issues because of the supply demands on things. The post that I put up was in response to some macroeconomic things that are being manipulated right now, and being as apolitical as possible, specifically tariffs. And we're a small brewery, but every penny counts. And the concern around all of that was, we have a grain that is priced competitively with the American stuff as it stands right now, cents per pound. I won't say how much, but any of the breweries out there that have access to the price sheets know what I'm talking about. But the potential percentage tariffs that were going to be put on the barley coming into the U.S. from Canada was going to make that wholly uncompetitive for us to do for beers that we have made. And I know we're not the only ones in this position. There are some breweries that use exclusively American grown. We use probably 50 to 60% American grown. A lot of stuff from the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, and places like Wyoming, Montana, and some of those places. Generally, and there's a lot in the Dakotas as well, but we have found what works for us, both from a desired outcome of the beer and also a price cost to bear for the business, and then what we can reasonably sell to the customer at a certain price. If we were to have a 25% tariff on the beers that carry those Canadian malts, you're going to look at beers that go up in cost from $7 a pint to $9 to $10 a pint, just based on the percentage of increase. And that cost is also going to be something that's going to happen not just on the things that have the tariffs applied to it, but when you have a thing that goes up in price that was a thing you bought previously, you're going to look for alternative sources. And because if you're looking at something that is supplied elsewhere and demand goes up, the price will go up for the alternatives as well. It's not just a tariff. The tariff has an impact that is not just on the thing that it's tariffing against. It is also the adjacent competitive substitutes that you might source instead. So because the demand of that is going to go up for cost reasons, which in turn will drive the price up because supply is what it is and the demand is increased. So think about in a natural disaster, gasoline is the amount of gasoline you have at a gas station and people are filling up their cars. The gas stations raise their prices even though they're not supposed to. There's a natural increase that occurs, like an equilibrium point that you find, and then you've got the gouging that occurs. And we don't expect the suppliers to do the gouging part because they want to keep customers long term, and if you lose one, you tend to stay, like if you decide to stop shopping for somebody who does that against a supplier that does that, chances are you're going to stop buying from them full stop because you don't trust them. So there's a lot of implications around this, and that we would like, again, we're not the only ones in this scenario. In reading everything I was reading, what was being talked about how it was supposed to help impact, you can't just spin up more American-grown substitutes, especially when the American substitutes are a thing that isn't the same as what was being sourced from somewhere else for a specific reason. Like, it's not the same makeup. So for us, it was a moment of frustration as much as it was trying to help clarify and quantify what we were seeing outwardly, because ultimately it has an impact on the person who comes in and buys a beer. It's not just us. Ultimately, if your cost goes up, you can't just absorb that cost. We've already absorbed CO2 prices going up like almost 200% over the last 4 years. And we just got another notice from our suppliers saying they're going to go up in cost, and we're shopping it because we've kind of had enough. And that's everything across the board. The fact that our beers were between $5 and $6.50 before pandemic, and really they're only like between $6 and $7.50 now. We've really only increased it a little bit, maybe a maximum of 20% in cost. The cost of everything else, like raw ingredients and other things to do business, and that's not including fixed costs like rent and other stuff like that, that has also gone up over time, and everybody's trying to get their cut. So ultimately, it's small businesses like us that suffer the most, and I won't get into the other macroeconomic things about recession and inflation and things like that that are probably going to be inevitable with some of this stuff happening. But ultimately, it's small business and the end consumer that will suffer. And there's been talk by your political entities, that whatever they are, saying, oh, expect temporary pain for a long-term gain. And I have contention with that. That's another conversation for another time, but I think I think it's very short-sighted, especially when it is going to hurt what is basically the backbone of all of your small communities, small businesses. You got to keep coming out, but if your wages aren't increasing with the rate of inflation, then your money doesn't go as far, and you're going to really pick and choose what you spend money on. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge that hasn't been navigated before, but it's something that I think everybody needs to know, and your media and your social medias and other things like that probably don't have the time or the bandwidth to talk about some of this stuff like in real detail, to say, hey, the effect of this is going to be these several things, and here are the knock-on implications. And I think we've got to think long and hard about doing our homework about how this impacts us, because we've got what, 28 breweries in the Dayton area. You've got probably 5 of which are larger. You could probably put them in a bucket as like the larger ones, and then everybody else isn't very big. A lot of neighborhood tap rooms, and not everybody's going to survive. And we've already seen the craft beer bubble kind of, not saying it's bursting, but you're seeing some casualties. And you've got to think that with all the things we've already navigated and the things that have been challenging to us, you got to save your pennies wherever you can and make the most out of it. And we're a craft industry. You're still making something that is considered specialty, even if it feels like craft beer is everywhere. Our job is to make a special product and a special experience around that. So the cost is going to go up commensurate with the cost of doing business. And I hate to make it so blunt, but that's kind of how it has to work. There's only so much you can absorb. So that's kind of the long and the short of that, but that's the more competitive we can all be naturally there's going to be some consolidation, especially in a maturing industry. But expecting a certain thing and having your finances out in front of you and planning for a year and annual production and all these other things, and then all of a sudden you get hit with this massive percentage increase, that's you're tearing big chunks out of the sails of your ship floating on the ocean. You're not going to be able to really get that propulsion you need to do what you need to do throughout the year, especially when you've planned out to do a certain thing a certain way and run really lean in the first place. So
when it comes to barley, so is barley like hops? You can take like a Citra is a great example. You can take it some different, like you can have it somewhere in America, then you have it across like in Australia or something like that, or something. Is that the same thing with barley, that different areas creates different flavors and malts, or is that different?
It can. I'm going to use our ESB as an example, and we have it on the menu here. That's probably a good one to jump to. Yeah, it's that one right there. This one here, the kind of copper color. That beer, English-style beers tend to have a bit more protein to them, right? From a body and mouthfeel perspective. If we used American malt for that, it would probably have a slightly thinner body to it. You would have to augment that beer with a dextrin malt or something to give it a bit more chewiness. You want chewiness in that. So for the ESB, there's a little bit of oats in it, and then there's a bit of flake barley. We added flake barley to it to give it some protein. Flake barley comes from places in the United States and places in Canada as well. It's a version of barley that has been processed to look like oats, and there's various advantages to using that. It's easily consumable for yeast in terms of the carbohydrates and other things like that. But you try and balance your recipes for that. Hops, you compared barley to hops. I think hops, it's really flavor for hops specifically, what you're looking for out of some of those. And hops there's a lot of engineering going on genetically to give you certain flavor profiles and certain growing climates. I would liken hops more to like grapes. Certain minerality and growing climates give you certain flavor profiles better than others, alpha acid, percentages, etc. But the barley in general, I don't know if it has quite the noticeable difference other than some of your outcomes in terms of mouthfeel and body and color and some other things when it comes to roasting and malting. So I think there's different ones that do better with that. So like Vienna malts and Maris Otters, they tend to have higher protein values, and they also tend to be sweeter malts when they're mashed. So there are characters of those that are just native with where they tend to come from growing wise. For your grain bill, they have impacts on alcohol and fermentation characteristics and other things like that, whereas the hops are more flavor specific with some of those things.
Okay.
Does that help? Does that answer the question?
Because I've just always heard, Galaxy is a great example. You can grow them in Ohio, but I forget where Galaxy comes from.
Australia, yeah.
Australia, that are just two different flavors you get out of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same.
Which is I find fascinating. On how you could have the same seed in two different areas and be completely different.
Yeah, you've got to think you've got the genetically modified versions of these things where they're tweaking for certain characteristics, but the rhizomes, you've got to think these are things that naturally grew, right, on their own before mankind was walking the earth, so to speak, and there are plant variants that have evolved, but you're taking things that are now so prescriptively grown that water control, environment moisture, soil minerality, and you would think that you're dealing with growers that are thoughtful about what pesticide, insecticide type stuff, herbicide that they're not using, and they're trying to make sure that that doesn't necessarily impact or end up in the end produce, so to speak. So there's a lot that goes into that, and there's a lot more control over that, whereas these fields of barley are enormous, and you still have to go through the malting process. So you're getting some characteristics from the malting process as well. And then if you're kilning for the crystal malts or any other specialty malts, there's more steps to that you're looking for, but it begins with a good primary crop for the malters to then do their thing. So whereas hops tend to just be, if you're processing it into the T90 pellets where you're just basically dehydrating it and pelletizing it, you're going to get a marginally different characteristic than like wet hops would be, or fresh hops are. So
when it comes to I'm not trying to compare the two, but I know like back in early 90s or 2000s, Anheuser was buying all of these hop farms. Did they do the same thing to the malt industry as well? And
yes.
Is that part of it? I mean, regardless of where we're at, if they didn't do that, if you had more areas where malt was coming from, could that help you navigate on what you need to?
Yes and no. I mean, the industries, the producer industries have grown in maturity. And obviously, early on, before craft beer got enormous, you've got places that you've got contract crops, right? So you're contracting that entire amount, or an entire amount a certain producer might have, and for consistency reasons. InBev's probably maybe now a bad comparison, because if any of their light beers are using like rice adjuncts or corn adjuncts for some of their stuff, like corn syrup and other things. So it's funny, like I think, I don't know if it was Mick Ultra or whatever, they were using corn from, I think, Cargill. Don't quote me on that, legal people. But there are producers of those things that will process that stuff into a ready-made malt to then just go straight into a boil at a giant facility producing those lighter styles. When it comes to like true like Bud Heavy, they're still using all of the things you'd expect to make a true American lager, straight from the grain. But those processes have gotten so big and so streamlined, mechanized. The outcome for anybody who's smaller than that, or they're small like us, or small like even the big craft breweries that are still getting, full batches of grain to put into a beer, there's going to be some variance there. So because you've got to look at the big ones, they're looking for consistency even when there wasn't that much competition. They're still looking for, you buy a Budweiser in California or in Missouri or in New York or in Florida or in Japan, it's going to be Budweiser. It's going to be pretty straightforward.
Which I always give them credit for, the big,
for sure.
how they do it.
I mean, they've got teams of chemists. They've got tons of sensory equipment that's monitoring all these different compounds in the beer. So there's a lot to be said for their monitoring equipment. And I think Heineken had a commercial a couple of years ago talking about one of their chemists talking about pH levels in a couple of different test batches, like just augmenting for like minor variability in end outcome. They were very like transparent about how they were using that technology to create consistency. Because you think about, they're a big brewery that is distributing worldwide. So you want those things to be as consistent as possible, especially if you have span of control that is probably looser the further the product gets from your home base.
All right. So which one you want to get into next?
So we've got two left on the menu. We've got the XPA, which is a fun style from Australia, or a style that's popular in Australia, even though it's from the West Coast originally. And then you've got the Hazy IPA. Why don't we do the XPA and finish with the New England? Yeah, so that's the first one there.
Since we were talking about Australia a little bit.
Yeah, as well, right? So this beer is a fun one. This one it's a pale ale, but it's got a bit of an earthier characteristic. It has a hoppiness to it that does have the more earthy bitterness, but it's really pleasant. I was on vacation in 2017 in Australia and happened to go to, the craft beer industry was burgeoning quite a bit down there, and there's a brewery named Balter that they're in Currumbin, it's Queensland, out on the coast. They were just releasing this, and they were just releasing their first IPA as well at the same time when I happened to be there. And one of the guys that owns one of the local bars in Melbourne, Australia, where I was staying, friends of friends, owned is a place called the Prince Carlton Hotel. And he was one of the first guys in the Victoria province to break contracts with the state brewers, because Australia was highly regulated with like Victoria bitters, Tui's, like there was a bunch of different ones that they were using, but they had contracts for taps. It's how they controlled what went on tap and production levels for these big state-run breweries. But Australia saw what was happening in the United States, and it's jobs, it's tax revenue, it's a bunch of other things. And it was also creating more social, civil discourse and community gathering. And the Australians are always social in the first place, so they don't really have that problem. But it was another layer that they saw as a very community first industry. So when I was there, they were releasing the extra pale ale that they made, and I was like, this beer is incredible. It's got an easy malt character. It's kind of bready. It's on the softer side, but it has a bit of a hop characteristic, and it's got like this. Ours doesn't have that much of a haze, but theirs had like a kind of like a small amount of haze to it. It was awesome. It was like 5 and change % alcohol, so it wasn't over the top on anything. And the Aussies, they love their beach beers with a little bit of hop character still. So they're not necessarily Miller, Bud Light, Coors Light crowd on the beach. They still like light, easy, crushable pale ale that's got some flavor to it. So we kind of, I was influenced by that when I was talking with my brother about coming up with a recipe, and it's gone over really well. It sells really well. We release it as kind of a late winter, early spring release once a year, and we get a good response from it, and then we go into the more kind of, I'm not gonna say fruity, but like more maybe citrus first seasonals in the summer as we get to warmer weather.
Yeah, this is definitely something I could see on a warm spring day and stuff like that. No.
It's an easy one. It's really nice. It's straw colored. So in terms of, like John Lewis likes to say, make clear beer great again. It's definitely in that ballpark. So.
Yeah. Because, we were talking about black IPAs coming back. I would love to see like some pale ales start resurging itself.
Yeah, so when this is off, probably in April, we'll brew our Lift Equation beer, which is a smash ale. It's just a single malt, single hop pale ale. Really easy, light notes of citrus, super simple, a little bit of hoppy bitterness, but nothing crazy. Really easy, it's like a great pizza and burger beer. This one is as well, but as it goes to the summer, it has a little more citrus character to it. We use El Dorado, and it glows this beautiful, like golden, luminous color as well. It's very cool. Tastes great. It's easy. Good summer beer. And we offer that then in the summer as well, because we have the hazy pale that we do, Tiny Sonic Booms, that you've got kind of the clear standard version of a pale ale, and then you've got the hazy version of it at the same time. So having that variety in the summer is really important from a menu balance perspective.
Because you see Sierra Nevada pale ale is still living and kicking, and
classic.
Yeah,
and it's so well executed and very consistent, and it still has all the flavor and all the things you'd want and expect from it. And those are the kind of the beers, like, we might have talked about this one of the last times I was on, but like one of my favorite breweries is Maine Beer Company out of Freeport, Maine. They make really good beers, really well executed, really thoughtful and layered, but without being very pretentious. It's always very welcoming. Like, I mean, everybody knows lunch. But they've like Tiny Beautiful Something's an amazing pale ale. Peeper's a great little pale ale. You've got other beers like Woods and Waters and some other things like that. They're all fantastic. So dinner if you want the double IPA. So, and if anybody's ever out there, I highly recommend going to it. They've got a very good like Neapolitan pizza kitchen there at their brewery on site, and then they've got a bunch of special beers. One of their buildings is a black barn, like it's painted black. And that's kind of their experimental R&D wing, and they encourage their employees to come up with recipes, and they'll trot out special beer releases from their Black Barn project, and you can only get them there, and it's worth checking out.
I need to travel more, I guess.
That whole Northeast lap's dangerous. You're going to come back with like $10,000 worth of beer.
So for someone that's never done it, what would you suggest if you ever took that trip up there?
So I think it depends. Like if you're good with a road trip, drive. If you feel like you want to drive, like fly out, set up like a central base like Burlington, Vermont or someplace like that, and then rent a car. That's worth doing as well, because Burlington's about 30 minutes from Stowe, which is where Alchemist is. You've got Foam, you've got Burlington Beer Company. If you go further south, you've got Lawson's, which is like Sip of Sunshine. They're really good beers. They're definitely more traditional on the IPA front, like really like hoppy bitterness type stuff. And then if you swing east, you go through New Hampshire. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Hill Farmstead being about 35, 40 minutes from Stowe, which I believe is a former guy that was at Alchemist that opened that up. And it's literally on a farm, and the beers are incredible. It looks like The Sound of Music, sitting out on the like the little patio area, like the rolling hills and the green, and it's incredible. So, and then if you're gonna drive, like get across over to Maine, go to Portland, go to Oxbow, go to Allagash. Those are classics. Everybody's had Allagash White. Very rarely do they put stuff out that's outside of their brewing kind of footprint. That's kind of their flagship, like, teaser beer that everybody gets. And then all the beers they have on site are great. And then if you drive up to Freeport, the experience is really good. It's just up the highway about 40 minutes. And then you can always come through Massachusetts and back down and hit all your Trilliums, your Tree Houses, your Full Clip in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and all those places. So it's really, really good. Sorry, Stoneface Brewing. They make Full Clip. But yeah, those are really, really good breweries up there.
Sounds like a couple-week trip.
I mean, I did it in 7 days. It was like 2,200 miles driving, and then I ended up coming all the way back down to New York City and across Pennsylvania. So I was out there for a wedding, decided to drive, took the cameras, did some photography work, and bought a good amount of beer.
So when you go to like another brewery, do you try to taste stuff and ask questions on what possibly you could bring back?
I think you're always learning. You're always looking for execution. You're always looking to see what other places are dabbling in, and I think there's some interesting things that are like nothing is new, so to speak, but it is. And like you can take references, like chefs. You're always looking for influences when you make a dish, but it's, can you create a collective new kind of aggregate of something that you're influenced by. Like I use the guys downtown at Jollity. They worked for Ann Kearney. It was kind of French traditional cuisine, but they've got big Japanese influences, and they're kind of like American classic as well. So you've got those three cuisine things, and they've made their own little take on these dishes, and they do a great job. So one of my favorite restaurants in Dayton, I think one of the best in the Dayton area. So you're always keeping your eyes peeled. Like ultimately we all enjoy beer, so we're all like looking for something to enjoy. You're not always looking to carve something out or like take something from somebody that somebody else has done. But if there's something interesting, you're like, oh, I think we might be able to do that and come up with something that's around that, or I know that's a thing that the Dayton area doesn't have that I think they might appreciate. You kind of test some things out and see how it goes. So those are, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but you're always looking for good stuff, and you're always looking for good execution. And I think there's work that goes towards coming up with something else that then you provide to, like when I come back here after visiting places, to try and actually create something that's interesting and it fits on the menu. It feels like something we would create as a part of what we do.
So if there was a certain style you could bring to Dayton that we don't have yet, what currently do you think we're missing?
I don't know. I think there are certain beers that I wish there was maybe a more widespread appreciation for or appetite for. We make a traditional-ish Belgian farmhouse saison. I wish more people in this area in general, we have a lot of people who, when they try it, they love it. And if they like that style, they'll love it. I wish there was a better context around that. I don't know if there's as much context around Belgian beer styles in this area. Again, you still have a lot of like German influence on some of the beers. And then as craft microbreweries go, you've got a lot of places that are doing kind of the stuff it's in fashion now. And I feel like the Belgian Saison stuff is a very underrated class of beers, especially when it comes to cuisine pairing stuff. charcuterie boards, French fries, like Flemish stew, but there's not really a huge Belgian like expat population here. I know the whole Taste of Belgian thing, they've tried to make that a thing in this area, and I just don't know if there's that.
They're already struggling.
Correct, right? They're closing places. So I think they tried to expand a bit, but that's.
It's an awesome place, though. I absolutely love them.
Yeah, so I think and they're.
That's an hairstyle I'd love to see is Belgium, like come back in some form and fashion.
Yeah, and I think there's. I just wish there was maybe a greater more, not necessarily mainstream, but a better appreciation, a more broader appreciation for it as a style goes. Because of the maltier ones like Belgian doubles and things like that, they tend to have a bit better response from people. And then, places like Little Fish, they've got the Grisette, Bière de Garde, Saison offering, and they do a great job. And it's a very downtown type thing.
I know Toxic has a couple Belgiums too.
Right, and I think there is a appreciation for it amongst the brewers. I mean, I talk about John again at Loose Ends, like he's a huge Belgian fan, and I think if he would have his druthers, he'd have every beer on the menu be a Belgian beer. He loves it, and for good reason. So Belgian beer is kind of it tends to be like there's a purity to it as well. Like it's kind of the roots of a lot of other beer styles, including German and English. Where things have kind of splintered off from there throughout the ages. But you've got the Abbey beers. I mean, the friars are making beers 1,000 years ago in the monasteries, and that kind of spread. And those recipes have stayed in like in the conscience there. To where you talked about West Valletta, which is the Trappist ale stuff, where they basically make a certain amount a year, the monks make it, and then they sell it, and it helps maintain like maintenance repair costs for the monastery every year. Like that's what they do that for as a thing, and it's there's a point of pride there that it's considered one of the best beers on the planet for a reason. So not just because it's exclusive to get and it's hard to get. So I think that's the one that I think would be cool. To have a bit more appreciation, and not that it's not by some people, but I just think the broader appeal would be good, because places in like on the East Coast that you tend to have a more European influence expat population, and there are places that have more of that type of approach. I also think like Czech Pils, like there's a couple places here that do it pretty well, but I don't know. Again, you talked about Pilsner earlier. When they're done really well, they're awesome. And there's a lot of ones that get put out that maybe don't live up to expectation. So I think if there's a couple places that do it really well, it's easy drinking beer, and it goes with a lot of food: sausages, pommes frites, French fries, whatever you want to call that. And it's classic communal, social sharing, community type experience. Mm-hmm. So that's, I don't know, not that we need to go back to the European heritage styles, but I think the context would be helpful for a lot of people to understand. The brewers know it, we generally know it, but the general public, and maybe that's our job to help continue to educate.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into
last beer.
Yes,
last beer. So it's Falcon Project. It's our New England IPA. Big citrus, grapefruit notes, bit of maltiness. It's a really nice. The aroma is amazing. And when it's super hazy and chewy, like this one started to clarify. It's towards the end of the batch, but it's got a character all its own. When it's like some of the suspended yeast and some other things, it's really good. So, but. Yeah, it's our number one selling beer, and we even with the seasonals on, like it's still in like the top 2 or 3 usually, with some of the seasonals like Oktoberfest and Irish Red, which very clearly get a lot of attention when they're on because they're only here for a little bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a good one to end on. It's a really nice, easy. It's rich in ways, like it leaves like a really good finish on the palate, and you kind of keep wanting to drink it, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm. No, it's. I love your beers, so
yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
But no, it's not too over the top on haze and the fruitiness of it. Mm-hmm. easable. I feel like an air crushable beer I could do.
Yeah, we go through it pretty fast when it comes on tap, and it's almost to the point with all the rest of the brewing schedule when we can't always have it on tap all the time. So it's kind of, we call it an intermittent flagship beer. So it's on most of the time, but when it's not, we've got other things we got to burn through as well. So that's been always the fun challenge of merchandising for seasonal stuff, and keeping the flagship and more core beers in rotation and on tap as regularly as possible.
Is that harder for a size like
it is
to have like? Is there certain beers you just cannot let go, or are all your beers like, okay, I can lose it for a couple weeks?
I think we've settled on like a core 6, with this one being one of them. So Golden Ale, the English Pale, the ESB, the Stout, JP7, and the New England IPA. Those are like kind of the core 6. We know Falcon is on probably 66%, 2/3 of the time. Because we also do other things, other pale ales, other IPAs, other seasonal things. We've got a Saison that'll be coming in hopefully in April. We've got an Imperial Amber, call it pale ale, double IPA, red IPA, whatever you want to call it. We just brewed that yesterday. It's going to be a new style for us. It's a brand new beer. Something maltier, but in the double form, especially as we get out of winter warmer. It's kind of a seasonal transition. And then we've got if anybody knows what a Burton Ale style is, we've been doing research for about a year and a half on it. It's kind of a ESB plus, but it's not a strong ale. And we're going to do it with some cold brew espresso. So we're brewing that in probably directly after the whole like St. Patrick's Day spike in business, because we're pretty busy in here. We may not be able to brew during that week, but that's something we're going to have on. We're going to kind of call it a breakfast beer. It will have caffeine in it, but it's really going to be, it's got a really good mouthfeel and body from the test batches we've done, and the coffee comes through in a really nice way without it being overpowering. So it gives us a really cool toffee coffee flavor. So if you're looking for like a 11 a.m. beer to come in and have like a pastry.
It sounds good to me.
Have a pastry and watch a soccer game. We'll have that on tap for us. So, but there's a bunch of other things, and we're going to do a collab with Full Circle for our anniversary and for an event that's happening in September. We'll release more about that. We actually have a meeting coming this Thursday to talk about what that's going to be. We have ideas what we want to do, but without putting the cart before the horse and have it nailed down, I won't necessarily mention that. What I will talk about is doing the From the Heart beer with the OCBA with Loose Ends and Southern Ohio. And we know some of the other breweries are partnering up and doing that as well. I believe Bach is doing it with Crooked Handle in Spring Grove as a part of their, at least that's what I heard. Again, may not be the same plan. I haven't heard otherwise. But so a bunch of the breweries in Ohio get together and do kind of a shared collaborative New England IPA style where everybody kind of goes in and buys a bunch of grain and puts a beer recipe together in that vein. So I think this year the recipe was the head brewer at Jackie O's came up with a hazy recipe, and we were all allowed to take a little bit of our own take on it. But as it stands, that's what we're going to do. I think that releases in May, so we're going to brew in April at some point. But yeah, a lot of fun stuff coming. Trying to keep the events going, trying to guinea pig food things on patrons, see where we need to net out on that, and see if we want to take the leap and put a little kitchenette in and have food more regularly. So I think that experience is going to be good if we get it right.
Right. So one of the last few questions I have for you, I've developed this other one. What is craft beer to you? What is craft?
It's a really good question. I mean, like elevated community experience, but it's elevated in a way because if you think about the early days, it was people who were into something different. It's an evolution, right? The idea of it is supposed to be an evolution. It's not cutting corners. It's not providing something you can just get anywhere. It's about having something special that there's a point of view, there's a perspective. And I feel like it's lost its way a little bit just by the pure interest by certain and it's not everybody. Actually, a lot of us are all still in it for the right reasons that we got into it, and the same reasons about doing something interesting. But when it turned into a thing where people like, oh, I think I like the idea of having a craft brewery and splashing some money out on it and not necessarily knowing how to do that or what to do, you lose some of that specialty. And not everybody's like that. Some people have gone into it with a very clear mind and they had the capital to do it in a certain way and they've done a good job. So there's, for me, like I said, it's about doing something a bit more unexpected or something to the fullest. So it's an evolved approach, especially as we came out of your macro 80s, 90s, the macro beers and the freedom to make something that was actually like a full beer that actually people wanted to enjoy, and it wasn't so diluted or watered down that you wanted something with flavor, you wanted something with character. So that's not to say that the cleaner, lighter, easier beers aren't bad ones to have, especially if you're having a couple. But I think the idea is having a perspective and doing something to the fullest, and that's what it kind of means to me. It's about having this canvas to explore and make something, and hopefully you're learning along the way because you don't get it right all the time, but you're coming up with something that is an expression of what your interest is. And I think that's a fun thing. And if you have people who come in and enjoy themselves while they're drinking a beer, that's even better because you've got an audience that has taken the time to walk through your door, spend money with you and time, and hopefully they're drinking more than one because they enjoy what you have.
Mm-hmm. So my last question for you. So when I talk to you again, probably in our panel,
okay,
what's the biggest thing you hope to achieve this year?
I hope that there is some stable footing in the craft beer space, and it's when you ask that question, I think about it in two ways. I think about it as like what we can control. So for us, like better experience, figure out augmenting our taproom experience to be even better for everybody who comes through the door, whether it's beer offering, whether it's snacks and food and other things that are, again, thoughtful and good execution to go with the beer. And then it's stuff that we can't control. We've got a lot of support from the OCBA, the Marion, the team, Brewers Association. They've got a lot on their plate to try and help share our story. And I say I say like the collective small micro nano brewery story to our government entities about the impact that decisions they make have on us, and about our ability to not just stay in business, but do things that are responsible, I guess responsibly managed businesses. And not everybody does that. Not everybody's going to do that. But I think the idea is to help, safety is always first. Creating a product that customers can safely consume is always first. But don't put unnecessary impediments in our way that we have no say in, that we have no true ability to impact. And for me, that's and that's not to point the finger at the government, but it's also a thing that, we want them to kind of understand our needs, and for them to be on our side, not just a certain collective of interests, whatever those are. So I think that's the biggest thing. I hope that what we've experienced in the last couple of weeks with this, are there tariffs, are there not tariffs? We're going to kick the can down the road 30 days. Can we have some more stable footing on that and not feel like you're not riding a yo-yo on, mm-hmm. Is it not? What are those things? So for me, I hope, for us, we're going to control what we can control, and hopefully continue to get better with what we do and always look to make people happy. And then the hope is that we're on more stable footing, with the macroeconomic tectonics that we don't have a lot of ability necessarily to influence unless we are all together. And that's the biggest thing. So, but that's kind of where I feel on that front. I mean, I just want to keep making good beer, and hopefully people enjoy it, and people have a place where people can keep coming and having good conversations, and sharing space, and not just us, but making their local spot their local, and mm-hmm. helping them stay in business, because we all have something interesting and unique to provide.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you sharing some time with me and talking
Always.
With me, and thank you for everything you do for me. And
of course. Well, and first of all, I've got to thank you for coming out and meeting us all where we are. been super helpful in trying to help, not just help us share our stories, but providing a platform for us to help do that as well. And I think that's something that money can't pay for that. I mean, you could charge for it, but money can't pay for that amount of care and support that you show all of us.
That will never happen for me. You're giving me beer, so that's good enough for me. I got a full-time job. I don't need anything else.
Well, we appreciate that. No, like I said, it's hard to put into words how much we appreciate what you do for us and the whole community, and your diligence to continue to trump for us, and that's something that we're really grateful for. So thank you. Yep.
No, I appreciate it.
Yep.
It's been fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Cheers.